Hey, it's your guy Tyrrell back with the interviews. In today's video, we're going to briefly analyze how Ajax's off-ball running consistently exposed Borussia Dortmund's backline. So in today's video, first we're going to focus on Dortmund's defensive shape, then we'll look at Ajax and Dortmund's right side and how they look to get forward runners into those positions, and then we'll solely focus on Ajax's midfield runners. So when we break it all down and we do look at the board, we have Dortmund in a 4-3-3 that at times did look like a 4-3-1-2 or a 4-3-2-1 with Reus and Haaland looking to drop off deeper to get on the ball. There were times where one of them were occupying the center backs with Haaland, or there were times where you ended up seeing both looking to drop off deeper into that midfield zone in search of possession. Nevertheless, you did have Ajax in a 4-3-3 that dropped off into a 4-5-1 out of possession. And what was key here was Dortmund's defensive shape. Because when you look at how they should be lined up, they should have that midfield advantage where if you do need Witsel to step towards Alvarez, you can. But it's Brandt against Berghuis and Bellingham against Gravenberch. What you end up seeing here is that even if you have one of Bellingham or Brandt stepping towards Alvarez and Berghuis, then Witsel could shift to the spare man. So if Brandt pushed to Alvarez, Witsel could shift across to Berghuis, and vice versa. If Bellingham pushed to Alvarez, then Witsel could shift across to Gravenberch. Ideally, in the wider areas, you would want Haaland and Reus to shift out to close down the fullbacks. But what we often saw with Dortmund's shape out of possession was that they were looking to try and close down Timber, Martinez, and Alvarez with their front three, and that would leave gaps in those wider areas for Mazraoui and Blind to push forward. Here you can see Dortmund's press in full effect from the front with Haaland and Reus stepping towards the center backs and Haaland dropping off on Alvarez, but it's a simple pass from Martinez that splits Haaland and Haaland to find Mazraoui free down that right channel. Dortmund looked to combat that by having their shuttlers shift across, so if Brandt pushed out to Mazraoui, then Witsel would close down Berghuis and vice versa. If Bellingham shifted out to Blind, then you'd see Witsel tasked with dealing with Gravenberch. And what we often saw in the earlier stages was that there was a situation where you ended up seeing Haaland stepping out to Timber, and that's where you saw Schulz pushing forward to close down Mazraoui, and Brandt was forced to track back to deal with Antony. However, this was an issue for Dortmund given the fact that Brandt and Bellingham had issues closing down Mazraoui and Blind on a consistent basis. And even if they did look to shift out, for instance, if Brandt pushed out to Mazraoui, that left space for Berghuis to push forward to occupy Hummels. Witsel struggled to cope with Berghuis and Gravenberch looking to push forward, and there were even times where Brandt and Bellingham stuck in their position, and they weren't worried about Berghuis and Gravenberch pushing forward to get into those advanced positions. The issue with that is that you have Haller looking to occupy both center backs, but if Berghuis and Gravenberch are pushing forward, then that leaves a free man in that attack, which would often be one of the shuttlers. And because Mazraoui and Blind were pushing forward without coverage shifting across on a consistent basis, then they were able to get the ball out to their shuttlers in those advanced positions. Here you can see a clear example of the issue. You have Blind pulling out Brandt and focus on that Dortmund backline. You have Berghuis and Haller occupying the center backs, and Gravenberch also free because Witsel and Bellingham are caught in those central positions. That allows Blind to slide the ball out to Gravenberch, and he's able to carry it forward to pull out Akanji and slide the ball out to Tadic ahead of Meunier. Ultimately, the issue that Dortmund also encounter here is that when Tadic receives the ball, he's able to split both Akanji and Meunier for Blind, making an underlapping run off Brandt, who isn't willing to continue tracking that movement. And it places Blind in left half space where he looks to pick out Antony free at the back post, but his low effort is cleared by Chan. Here you can witness Dortmund's press in full effect with Reus looking to swarm Timber, but focus on that Dortmund backline. You do have Haller and Berghuis occupying both center backs, and then you have Gravenberch a few yards just behind Bellingham. Timber does a very good job of evading Reus's pressure, and now focus on that Dortmund backline. Haller is looking to step towards the halfway line to pull out Akanji, and that's where Gravenberch now locates that gap between Meunier and Akanji. Akanji and is looking to make a run off Bellingham. That ultimately results in Timber locating the movement of Gravenberch and clipping a long ball over the top for Gravenberch's run across Meunier, as Bellingham isn't interested in tracking his run and is looking to call him off to the right back. This should present Gravenberch in a position to go 1v1 with the keeper, but unfortunately for the Ajax midfielder, he lets the ball bounce just ahead of him and it ends up looping over his head to allow Meunier to recover. If we quickly shift to Ajax's defensive shape out of possession, yes, they did struggle with Haaland and he should have possibly scored a few goals here, but when you look at how they were looking to stop Dortmund, it did seem a bit more practical. There were simply times where Haller was dropping off Witsel and Gravenberch and Berghuis were dealing with Bellingham and Brandt, but even in the situations where Haller was looking to step towards the center backs, there were scenarios where Gravenberch was pushing out to Witsel and Berghuis was dealing with Brandt and they would leave Bellingham free, and that's because Alvarez was sticking in that central area to deal with Reus or Malen if they dropped off deeper. But there were also times where we did witness a perfect press from that midfield trio where Alvarez would pick up the spare advanced player if Gravenberch or Berghuis was looking to step towards Witsel. Here's an example of Ajax's pressing with Tadic stepping towards Akanji, but the center back sliding the ball across him into the path of the unmarked Bellingham when you see Gravenberch and Berghuis stepping towards Witsel and Brandt. However, when Bellingham receives the ball, that's where you see Alvarez stepping forward to shift across to apply pressure. If you look to an example, here you could see Gravenberch sticking on Brandt, and that's where you also see Berghuis calling off the run of Bellingham to Alvarez to track it as he looks to step tight on Witsel. And then you could see Akanji on the ball with Haller shifting over to apply pressure, and this is where you witness Alvarez dropping off into that backline between the center backs as you have the two shuttlers stepping towards Brandt and Witsel, but because Reus is moving into a central area, he looks to track that movement and it allows Timber to deal with Bellingham if he makes a forward run down that left side. Nevertheless, it appeared evident that both sides had issues down their right-hand side. Meunier was constantly pushing forward beyond Tadic to get himself into advanced positions to run at Blind, and this wasn't necessarily an issue for Ajax in the sense that even if Blind stepped out to Meunier, if Reus shifted out into that right channel zone, Martinez was capable of shifting across, and the same could be said if Bellingham pushed into that zone if Reus moved into a midfield position. It was also beneficial to Ajax that whenever Meunier broke beyond Tadic into the final third, his delivery to that front three in the final third or in the penalty area was wayward. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the pitch, whenever Mazraoui broke beyond Malen, Brandt couldn't shift across on a consistent basis to close him down, and Antony was occupying Schulz. So that presented opportunities for Mazraoui to break forward and make underlapping runs to combine with Antony, and there were simply times where he was even making runs in between Schulz and Hummels to get himself into advanced positions. This was a reoccurring theme for Ajax, and Mazraoui's running in between those gaps and making those underlapping runs consistently got Ajax into legitimate goal scoring positions. If we focus on another pressing breakdown from Dortmund, it's simply Pasveer splitting Reus and Haaland to find Martinez dropping in between them. They created a 3v2 in their own zone, and that allowed Martinez to carry the ball towards the halfway line where he ends up pulling out Brandt, and you could also see Witsel stepping forward to try and close him down, but focus on the right channel as you have Mazraoui breaking beyond Malen, and you also see Antony towards the touchline. When the Ajax defender clips the ball out to Antony, you already see Mazraoui making an underlapping run to create a 2v1 scenario down that right channel. What ends up happening is that as Antony cuts central, you witness Mazraoui making that run in between Hummels and Schulz to take them out of the game, and you only have Witsel tracking back as Gravenberch is making a free run towards the penalty area off Bellingham. The movement of Antony and Mazraoui takes out three Dortmund players, and it allows Antony to square the ball to Gravenberch, and he receives it at the edge of the box, but from this position he can only test the keeper with a low effort. Later on in the game, you could witness Brandt looking to block off the passing lane into Alvarez as he steps to the keeper, and while Malen instantly does step to Timber, he's worried about Mazraoui and he makes a quick shift to his left, which creates the passing lane for Timber. When Timber receives the ball, the issue that Dortmund encounter here is that Mazraoui's already breaking beyond Malen, who has no interest in tracking back. And because that ball is now slid out to Mazraoui, he could shuttle it out to Antony, and now you have a 2v1 against Emre Can. That 2v1 does result in Antony sliding the ball across Can into the path of Mazraoui, making an underlapping run into right half space. And while Witsel should be shifting across to provide cover, he ends up holding his position to attempt to block the cutback. But look at the penalty area. Gravenberch is already making a run beyond Bellingham into the box, and there's no one tracking Berghuis ahead of the center backs. Mazraoui ends up playing the pullback across Witsel, and look at the penalty area once again. Akanji looks to step to Berghuis, who is pulling Haller towards him, and Berghuis is aware that Gravenberch is making the run beyond Bellingham, and he simply pokes the ball in towards his path, and from this position Gravenberch gets another great opportunity to increase the lead, but again he's denied by the keeper. Lastly, besides Haaland's inability to convert legitimate goal scoring chances in Ajax's penalty area, Dortmund's downfall here was simply their inability to track runners from those midfield zones. We witnessed their shuttlers making runs off Bellingham and Brandt that weren't tracked, and even when you look out to the wider areas, Mazraoui was making runs off his marker in Malen or Brandt to get into advanced positions, and even Blind down the left-hand side was simply combining with Tadic, making runs off Bellingham, and Dortmund simply weren't willing to pick up those runs, and that led to several Ajax legitimate goal-scoring chances. Initially, you witness Blind on the ball, and he pulls out Bellingham, and he's looking to slide the ball into Gravenberch, who is occupying Akanji. We'll focus on that midfield zone where you witness Berghuis in ample space beyond Witsel and Brandt. When Gravenberch receives the ball, he does attract Witsel to him along with Akanji, and still there's no one picking up Berghuis, who is looking to break into the space in between Scholes and Hummels as you have Haller occupying the center back. What happens next is that Gravenberch is able to spin away from Akanji and Witsel, and he ended up pulling out Hummels, and he slides the ball into the path of the unmarked Berghuis, and that now creates a 2v1 as Scholes is forced to shift across. And as you can see, once Berghuis does attract Scholes, he slides the ball into the path of an unmarked Antony, who's free to break into right half space, and even though he receives the ball with time to get a shot off on goal, he hesitates and he allows Hummels to get back across to make a vital intervention. The build up to Ajax's second goal witnesses Blind not a loose ball over Reus into the path of Haller, who's shifting laterally in the Dortmund penalty area ahead of Bellingham. However, when Haller does receive the ball, Dortmund are in a good position to deal with the threat, as Bellingham is tight on the Ajax striker and Reus is tracking the movement of Blind. However, the issue that Dortmund encounter here is that Reus gets sucked into the ball as Haller looks to bring it down, and he simply pokes the ball across Reus for Blind's making a run to the penalty area, and that allows him to volley a low effort beyond the keeper. Here we witness Mazraoui sliding the ball across Witsel into the path of Antony, who is ahead of Scholes, and focus on Berghuis, who's in a pocket of space ahead of Hummels, and he simply plays a first-time ball into Berghuis, who then slides it across Hummels and Scholes, who's pulled out of position, for Antony to break down the right channel. As Antony carries the ball towards the Dortmund penalty area, focus on the movement of the Ajax shuttlers. You have Berghuis beyond Brandt and Witsel, and Bellingham not tracking the movement of Gravenberch. That results in Antony pulling the ball back into the path of Berghuis, who does enter the Dortmund penalty area, and while he can slide the ball to an unmarked Gravenberch, who's also looking to break into the box, he opts to fire a low effort that flies inches wide of the net. So as you can see, this was far from a defensive masterclass from either side, but Ajax's movement off the ball, specifically from the midfield shuttlers, created several issues for Marco Reus' men.